Hi, this is Laura Haran, and this is my video presentation for my INFX 531 METS application profile project. I'm going to be doing the Smithsonian Cooper-Hewitt National Design Museum. So the Cooper-Hewitt is affiliated with the Smithsonian. It's located in New York City. It holds 200 and 1,700 design objects as well as a library. And it's also closed for renovation at the moment, which means the museum has reacted with a very active digital presence. I chose to look at the Cooper-Hewitt for this project for a couple reasons. For one thing, I was really impressed with their new collection site, which was launched earlier this fall. So as I was going through the metadata course, I was looking and seeing at how they were displaying their collection metadata and was really intrigued and wanted to spend more time exploring it. For one thing, the site is highly browsable. Each of the images are affiliated with colors. They also use a lot of accessible language within their records. So Blank is the artist of this object, making it really easy for museum professionals to understand what's going on, which I think is really important. There's also a ton of images associated with the object records, both from a collection standpoint as well as from a UI perspective. And again, I'll talk about this a little bit later in the image section. Um, I was also interested in the Object of the Day blog because they had embedded audio recordings of blog posts, as well as I have an interest in general in born digital content. So why did I choose this for METS? Well, I thought it was a good fit because of the diverse and descriptive and administrative metadata needs for the objects, object images, and Object of the Day blog posts. Also, I was really intrigued by the file section. I thought that would be really helpful for wrangling all the image related to the objects in this collection as well as the blog. Well, I ended up not using the file section in my METS AP just due to time and understanding. I think it was fun to think about and consider as I was going through the process. So the METS sections I utilized were the METS header for information about the AP, the descriptive metadata section, the administrative metadata section, which included both technical metadata and rights metadata, as well as the structural map section. Because it's required, I did try to, map to things, but that was less successful than I would have liked. So other schemas and application profiles that I utilized were a modified VRA, which was for the descriptive metadata for objects, as well as the source metadata for objects and related images, a modified DC, Dublin Core, which is for descriptive metadata for the blog post, a modified mix, which is for the administrative and technical metadata for object images, and all the modifications were done through a local terms AP that I created, which allowed me to create terms that more closely mapped Cooper-Hewitt metadata needs. So this slide shows which APs and which terms in general were utilized in which sections of my METS instance. So let's take a quick look at an object record. Notice it looks pretty normal. Got a title and some tombstone information, an image. You can browse by colors of the object. There's a description and other metadata. And as we're scrolling, notice that it's very colloquial. Since VRA is commonly used for museum collections and other physical items, most of the terms mapped incredibly well to my object records. So for the presentation, I'm just going to focus on the things that I didn't use. For one thing, I dropped the display element for all really of the terms that I was using with VRA because of the way of the casual language we discussed earlier used in Cooper-Hewitt object records. I thought that would be creating some conflict in terms of like how it was going to be displayed and whatnot. So for our purposes, I just removed it. It would be interesting to see how it works on their end with their information. Since we were focusing strictly on works and images directly related to works, I pared down the different element branches. So normally you would have work, images, and collection. The Cooper-Hewitt Museum doesn't really have its works and objects organized into individual collections as we've seen at other institutions this quarter. So for our purposes, all the works are together, and we only have images that are directly associated with works. One element set that worked incredibly well with the Cooper-Hewitt object metadata was the agent set. So as you can see here, there is a lot of agent metadata associated with the objects. This is from, I believe, the John Lennon record. So there was an association that helped produce it, multiple associations, the poster company, the publisher, the designer of the actual object, as well as the donor who donated it, or various donors who donated it to the museum. So this, framework worked incredibly well for both defining the person or entity by name, as well as their role in the situation. Browsing by color was a really big part of the reasons why I decided to do this collection. The Cooper-Hewitt actually just released some information about use. It's only been in place for maybe a month or two so far, and I guess it's really increased user interaction with their object records. So 48% of visits to their website involved, or specifically to the collection website, involved interacting through the color browsing by clicking on these swatches here. Whereas only 4%, roughly 4% of visits to the collection's websites interacted with the search feature. So that's really sort of demonstrates how, viable and valuable this feature could be within museums. A couple interesting aspects with Browse by Color. It's enabled through the CSS3 color spectrum, which unfortunately I tried searching and there wasn't an XML schema for that or any sort of thing I could just easily import. So instead I use different enumerations based on the objects I used in my instances. So, in the future, if this was going to be expanded across the Cooper-Hewitt, they would need to make a comprehensive either enumeration list or some sort of other type to limit the options and make them linkable. Also, it's sort of interesting the debate whether this is image metadata or object metadata. So even though the colors are derived by running object images through Give Paravinov's Roy G. Biv color analysis tool, which was developed for the Powerhouse Museum in Australia. And then this tool picks 5 predominant colors that reflect the image of the object. So these colors are derived via digital image analysis. However, the Cooper-Hewitt decides to use these colors to describe the object itself. So I felt really comfortable putting this color set, which I created with a local term, under the object descriptive metadata. Another term I added was exhibition history set, an exhibition history, which is a string that allows the Cooper-Hewitt to include information about which exhibitions a object has participated in. As I wrapped up my project, I realized another possible element for this would have been VRA location, but at the time I was having trouble thinking of how do I represent that within this collection, and that was my solution. VRA techniques was another element that didn't quite fit the needs of my collection. Currently you can browse by object type, so for example I could look at all the cameras or all the posters or all the drawings, whereas technique is more, it seems more, it's better fitting for art objects instead of, design objects, which are oftentimes everyday things like match safes and, figure drawings and stuff like that instead of, sculpture and things that are more formal. So to fix this problem, I created a object type set as well as an object type with the numerations based off of the items in my instances. And obviously this would be expanded if it was going to be used for the whole collection. All right, so now we're going to move on to images. And first, let's take a look at the images used on the Cooper-Hewitt's collection website. All right, so part of their new collections website is the fact that their images are all very uniform on their front page. So as you browse, if you mouse over, it goes from a square image of a close-up of an interesting part. If you mouse over it, it'll go to the full image so you get an idea of what you're actually looking at. So those are 2 images associated with the piece, the object. Additionally, while you're loading, it didn't do it for me this time, but there's a black and white GIF or GIF, depending on how you pronounce it, that sort of sits here while this image is loading, which is a smaller image. And if you click on it, you get a high-res image, so you can really check out what's going on in this. Additionally, if I decide I want to share this on like a social media item, there's a different image associated with it here. And I found out about all these different images based off of the collections, the view source of this website. So METS is the primary schema and application profile that I use for my image metadata. However, rights metadata isn't really set up within METS. So for that, I utilize the image section within VRA. METS works really well for demonstrating image metadata as well as a lot of the embedded image metadata, which is where I got most of my information for my instances. There are a lot of different element options in METS, and so I really tried to simplify it down to just the terms that were required for my schema. Most elements are the same as METS, they're normal terms. However, occasionally I added a couple terms through my local terms to better map to the CH metadata. For example, mixed compression, that element didn't quite fit the needs of the CH images, which were usually either uncompressed or there was no information at all. So I simplified it to map better. I am not an embedded image metadata expert, and occasionally there are some terms that didn't totally map to what was available in METS, and I wasn't able to figure it out. I'd imagine that pixel depth does exist in METS, but I wasn't able to find it, so I created terms to fit those needs. So image embedded metadata is pretty standardized from what I've learned over the course of this project. So most of my terms mapped. I was also very fortunate that only one of my items included all of the image data terms, or at least the ones included here. I also added a few of my own for things that weren't represented within METS. Moving on, for the blog metadata, so there's objects of the day, blog posts, and I use this utilizing the DC schema that I created earlier this year with some modifications. I really just wanted very simple metadata here. So as you can see, most of it is the same as before with a couple additional things which I'll go into. So one area that didn't quite map was Dublin Core coverage tag, which generally represents the spatial or temporal topics of the resource. The Object of the Day blog uses a free-form tagging just based on how they would describe what's happening in the blog post. So while it's logically related to coverage, I decided to create my own tag term, tag set, and a tag which is enumerated from 0 to unbounded. So currently I didn't have any enumerations for these tags based on the couple of blog posts that I included in my instance. There weren't any that were the same. But what I would recommend for the Cooper-Hewitt is to create a controlled vocabulary for their blogs that might be able to be added to as they change throughout the area, and do this through enumerations, maybe within a tag type. And also utilize the DC relation tag to map blog posts to the object that they're, representing. I did this through the object record URL. One thing to note that I thought was really interesting is that the blog will link to the object record, but the object record doesn't link to the blog. And I think that that's something they should change in the future. I'm sure that wouldn't be too common. Something that I was really excited about when I started looking at the Cooper-Hewitt was the fact that their blog included an audio recording of the blog post for several of their blog posts. So I thought that was really cool and another facet that might be really interesting to look at in METS. However, when I was inspecting the source code of the object of the blog, I found out that the audio recording isn't actually hosted by the Cooper-Hewitt. It's done through a third party. Because I didn't have access to the files, I decided to just include a tag that could be used to denote whether or not the object blog post has an audio file or not. So with object, images, and blog posts being my three item types, I pulled them together using modified versions of VRA, Mix, and Dublin Core, as well as some local terms within METS to create instances that theoretically could link them all together. So I'd encourage you to check out my data dictionary to see how these terms map to the terms used in the Cooper-Hewitt website, as well as where these terms were included within METS. This concludes my presentation on METS. Thank you for listening.